God is greater, our God is stronger.
What we're going to do at this point is a Q&A session. So we've had several questions that have come in for Matthew throughout the course of the day, and this has been a neat element to us having some of our guest speakers over the course of the last year. The goal of this is, on one level, to give Matthew the chance to field some of your questions, but also for us to maybe get to know a couple of other things about Matthew here specifically. Here's where I want to kick off, Matthew. You've mentioned a lot of your story today, being in Nova Scotia, being the heathen that you were, and all that good stuff. But I want to know, I'd like to maybe start a little bit with your family a little bit more. Like I said before, they were not able to be with you today. Maybe one of these days we can kind of get all of us together and that'd be neat. But tell us, what would you share with us maybe a little bit about like you and your wife, and you told us how you met, but did it take really long for her to realize that your singing is more than just your love for Jesus and and not how did that relationship blossom?
Good market timing. Sometimes you have a recession or there's a stock that goes down because everybody's negative. Well, she just finished free tournament and wasn't married yet. So, I swooped in at the right time because, if you go to one of these Christian universities and you don't have a husband, you're like, oh no. And so, I realized, I got like the best wife possible at her most desperation moment. She's like, really, I'll take any guy, and I'm like, I'm here.
So really, was truly a lack of options on her part, but for you, it was marrying up in a way that you...
Oh, yeah.
That's great.
I bought low and got high.
Now, before we get ourselves into trouble, let's move on to your kiddos. So you have two kiddos, Noah and
You cut
Gabriel.
that one off really quick.
Yeah, I did. Yeah, because I'm afraid I might have to answer for some of that kind of conversation.
Did you meet your...
else there who was much more impressive than I was, but not because he was like positively more impressive. It was a guy who had on crazy outfit, interesting personality. He's got it stuck in her mind. So her first impression of me was on her first formal day at campus. I was coming to pick up a van load of freshmen to go to music camp, and
Bible camp as well, and she says this from all the Bible camp people, and I know there's some Bible camp here. She goes, the leaders of our Bible camp, Camp Cornelia they call it, are the most creative people I have ever met. And I have to say that's true. We are so filled with a lot of talent, and she loves the SYD stuff. So, we're so blessed that she is a young lady that loves awkward. Remember, we had a concert. I saw Dr. Petrillo there, and so she had a solo, and then the other guy who had the solo that came in as her boyfriend with that. And then he just kind of like, I'm done. And he started playing basketball. And he comes to me recently. He's like, Dad, I don't remember tennis being that hard to get good at. I said, no, you've been playing since you've been like 7. Like, you don't know how you were. Trust me, I watched. But he goes to a little private school. Gabrielle's kind of homeschool / this Artios performing arts school. And so that's what they're into, and
Very
they're
good.
great.
So something you haven't mentioned, but may just for interest out here, you also coach tennis.
I do
correct?
coach tennis. Yes, I know nothing of tennis until I started coaching. And so one day, Noah got into it, and I said to myself, I'm going to do whatever my kids do. And they were in tennis. And Charity got them involved in that, and I said, I'm just going to learn tennis. And so I start practicing, and I'm at the high school fields, and Ben Wolf, he's the high school tennis coach there, sees me, and he walks up to me, and he knew me from Noah and the kids, and he goes, Matthew, would you help me coach? And I said, Ben, I don't know anything about tennis. He goes, I don't need you for tennis. I need you to help develop character. He's a non-Christian, doesn't come to church. He's not even a believer. But he wanted me to come and develop character in our tennis program. So Ben and I actually have started, not just high school, we have a whole tennis program that it's in the community. We have about 300 kids.
Oh, wow.
And one summer, our whole theme was, I gave a talk, which was a devotional, and a lot of the coaches and the parents would come up and say, like, you're really good at that. I'm like, well, that's what I do. So that's how I have kind of created a lot of connections in the community through my tennis ministry, and I know more people actually in tennis than I do at church now.
Yeah.
Which is kind of cool because anywhere I go in Castle Rock, I know a kid.
That's cool.
Yeah.
That's very neat. So, okay, this is one of the things I wanted to, speaking of developing the character of kids and in the program that you're doing, we got a good chuckle this afternoon at lunch that you were in youth ministry for a while, but you realized that, I'm trying to remember how you phrased it, you said that you don't have the kind of personality that is conducive for youth ministry, but you are great in, you have a great relationship with teenagers, but I think it was something about like breaking rules at a go-kart place that you just finally said, yeah, I'm not the best influence as a youth minister, but you're great as a preacher for some reason.
No, that was the parents who said I wasn't very good
Oh, the
at it.
parents said that
I
you were
thought
not
I was
very
great.
good at it. Okay. Well,
But I realized that I was too immature for youth ministry.
but you're mature enough to be in a pulpit.
Yeah, I did great with that.
Well, here's my question to you. You've spent time, you were able to work with teenagers in tennis and developing the character, but you also, as we've seen today, you're very open about being the heathen, as you keep phrasing it. Having grown up in the way that you did, what kind of insight would you be able to give that you think you could give to some of maybe our young people or our young adults about some of the biggest differences between those two lives?
Oh, so you're asking what's the difference between somebody who's living in the world and somebody who's living in the church?
Yeah, if you're gonna, because and let me maybe couch this a little bit more. Kids growing up in the church, going to church, are not immune to the very things that you didn't have.
Yeah.
Or just because we come to church doesn't mean that we are immune to the influences of the world. You happen to be one of those people that you literally can speak from both sides of the fence. You have been in the world, you've had that lifestyle, but now you've also had as many years as a Christian, as a man of faith. So what would you just give as an encouragement to some of those young people as maybe they're fighting that fight, or what's the...
That's a great question. The first thing I would say, and I believe this so passionately, being in the church is the greatest thing ever. And whatever problems, fights, disagreements, struggles, whatever you're whining about, or justified or not justified, trust me, it's 20,000 times better to be with Christian people than in the world. When I was in the world, and I think I had years to overcome this, it's too easy to think about yourself. And there's maybe even sadly, sometimes the world gets into the church, we think about ourselves way too much in the church, what I want, what I think is the right path. But if you just look at per capita, how many great people are in the church, it's so phenomenal. People in the church, they love you. They want the best for you. People in the world, it's kind of more of a user type of value. So I've put it this way. The world is trying to create a resume character. They're looking at what values and virtues for your eulogy. And if you think about the difference between the two, I want to be You want me to say more about
No,
being
no, I don't. No, I just,
Okay.
I like that. I'm processing,
Don't I think young people. I think there's a curiosity. There's a curiosity about what's in the world, and maybe it's not that bad. And sometimes as Christian people, I think we do. I think we beat up on the world pretty good. Like, oh yeah, that's wrong, that's wrong. And sometimes it almost causes young people to be, well, I want to go check it out myself. It's not what you hope it to be. You're never see people leave the church and be thankful for it. At Castle Rock, we have this youth room, and every youth that ever comes through our church puts their handprint on the wall, and then they write down their favorite verse. And one day, I've been teaching the teenagers for the last few months, and one time I talked about it, and every kid on that wall, I could say I knew. And some of them I had a deeper relationship with others, and then some I knew. But I pretty much know where all of them are at. And I went through the board, and I was like, faithful, unfaithful, faithful, unfaithful. And I'll tell you, the ones that are faithful have had some struggles. Life can be a struggle. But I've also seen where the ones who left the church have ended up. And I'll tell you, their lives are a lot harder.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I guess maybe that's young people, you're going to have those hard times. There are going to be those times where you're questioning what you've always been raised with, and I'll go ahead and say it. That's okay. It's okay to ask the questions. Otherwise, it won't actually become your faith. All right? If you just blindly accept it all the time, it's harder for it to take root. But I wanted to ask that question because, again, a lot of times it's for many of you that are here, young people, you are living. You're living in homes. You're coming to church all the time. And so you're not able to oftentimes see both sides of that fence. And so I wanted to be able to ask that question with Matthew while he's here because of the way that, he's lived on both sides. And so it's good to be able to hear that perspective. Let me shift gears a little bit. Let's get into some of the stuff that you've covered in the book. I'm a little bit curious. The name of your book on this evangelism is Natural Evangelism. Tell us a little bit, where did the inspiration of that title and that thought process come from?
Well, so I wrote this dissertation, and
I got a question on the dissertation
later
too.
Yeah, and I did it for 5 years at Castle Rock, and I didn't have any really permanent missional change. That was the kind of fancy terminology, missional, this word. It really just means get out into your community. And we did a lot of things, and I had this team, I worked with the team, And I didn't really look at it and say, we're now a missional church. We are really in the community. We did some good stuff. And it really came from, has to start with takes 10 years. And we don't realize how much culture influences us. Regurgitating form in, and the owner was there, fortunately, and she was a single lady. And I walked in, I said, "Hello, I'm Matthew Morine. I'm the minister at the Castle Rock Church of Christ." And we
that a lot of us are curious that it's you have to build that. And so we're just going to kind of go through and catch these things here a bit. One person asked, how long do you take to build the relationship before starting the study process? And how might you initiate that conversation to the study process?
Some people would like to study the Bible, and they'll approach you and ask you. Some people just want to learn as you go. So, like, I mountain climbed. I do play tennis. I have a lot of studies through life. And I think people get and then next thing you know, they'll show up at your door. They'll be like, hey, I want to come to your church.
Yeah.
That's how it works for me. I think as members, you could probably ask for, do you want to learn more about the Bible, or do you want to study the Bible? But wait until you hear a feeling. Don't ask until you get the feeling.
Okay, so I recall, it's been within the last couple of years. I recall it wasn't fully professionally done, but it was a pretty broad study that some surveying that someone did, and they were surveying those who are unchurched, non-believers, and asking them, what are the things that aggravate you about your Christian friends?
Yeah.
And I thought it caught my attention when I saw the title of it. And one of the things that they said throughout it in the course of the study is that in this group of non-Christians, non-believers, they said one of their biggest pet peeves is when their Christian friends make them into their project.
Oh, yes.
Like and there's a perception, and it sounds like that's a little bit of what you're describing here, is trying to build a relationship to the level that once you do engage that Bible study, you're trying to not come off as, okay, you're the non-Christian, I'm the Christian, you are now my project, and I'm not giving up until I have converted you. And that can come across not what we intend for it to be, but that, we don't mean for it to come that way, but it can. So along these same lines, you're talking about people sharing their feelings and whatnot. I'm going to read this as it comes, and so it's a little bit longer, so just hang with me for a minute. But I think it follows up well to what you just said, to this last one. So, how can I relate to others in the world who have been living a life of sin and haven't been to church, when I grew up in the church and have lived a relatively righteous life? Of course, I've had sin in my life and I have weaknesses, but in comparison, others might not be able to relate to me and may think of me as coming off as more judgmental or that I'm better than them. Is there something that you could recommend to bring out their feelings if they might not be comfortable sharing them with someone like me, rather than maybe someone who came from the same place as them? Does the question make kind of...
I think I got it.
Okay.
I hope. I like to say that I'm still my elder's project. Okay. You're coming from two different perspectives. And I think the best way to do that, or the way I try to do that, is through some common ground.
Okay.
So it's a hobby, it's an interest. It's essentially what is on somebody's Pinterest board. That's what you're looking for.
Is that still a thing?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Oh, yes. I hope so. So I know with guys, that's one of the best ways to do it. I almost think that finding the commonality is going to help bridge the gap, because once you kind of share something in common, like if you are into quilting, it doesn't really matter where you're coming from. You just want to quilt. And then those conversations kind of naturally flow, and you can see, do they share some feelings? Do they share about their families? I think there's always a little bit of perception about Christians being judgmental, and I really think the world's doing a great job of selling that lie. Because I think the world is much more judgmental than Christians these days. If you look at how people socially shame one another, the world's very judgmental. I don't believe this whole like Christians are judgy and the world is so accepting. That's not true. But I think it's important for you to demonstrate caring for that person. You know, we're in this relationship because you like what you like and I like what I like. Can we come together about this? Like because of this. And then if there's other areas that we can be friends with, that's fine too. Mm-hmm. But if they see that you're just genuinely in there to be their friend, to accept them as a person, they're going to be a lot more open and loving. So like, I'm watching this basketball game with this one guy. His son plays on the team. He's a good kid. And his son gets fouled, and my wife had a talk with me about not yelling at the refs.
Did she now?
Yes, she did. And so I made a promise that I would not yell at the refs, because I'm a little of an external processor. And so when I see something, I'm like, hey! And that makes her like not happy. Well, his son gets fouled, and I'm just, and then, you know, she sits up there with this guy's wife, and she pats my knee, and I'm like, yes. And I just looked at him, and I said, I can't yell at the refs. I said, but man, your son, I love your son, and I don't want anything or anybody to hurt him. And I feel like if somebody fouls your son, it's like my son. Well, at that moment, that man is sitting there thinking, that guy's on my side in life. Mm-hmm. Like, he is with me. And he doesn't come to church or anything. But does he think I care about him and his kid? Yeah. Like, he's seeing me react. And I think if we just show that type of caring, like, you know what? I'm here for you. People in the world don't see that. And I think it's just really powerful. So, is that helpful? Or what am I missing?
No, I think that's good, because it's, you know, like if we think about from where I understand the question is coming from, it would have been, say, you and I having met, you know, when we were 9, we're about the same age. So, you know, had we met at that 18, 19 age, I grew up going to church. Like, it was, I have a family heritage of that. It's what it is. And so I would have probably struggled to try to connect with you in a way that I could get you to discuss your feelings, because I'd have been afraid that he's not going to share feelings with me. He thinks I'm going to pounce on him. Like, we almost put the self-label of judgmental upon us, that we try to suppose what the other person's going to think.
When I was a teenager, there was this kid named David, and it was funny. He was actually a member of the Church of Christ.
Okay.
And it was shocking, because you don't see anybody who's a member of the church up in Nova Scotia. He was. And I bumped into him one day because I was reading the hockey news, and he looks over at me. He goes, "You like hockey?" I'm like, "No, duh. I'm reading hockey news." And he actually became a really good friend of mine. And he was so different from everybody else, because he brought that Christian perspective. People may tease you they may kind of mock you a little, but I'll tell you, the Christian perspective is so powerful that they're curious about you now. You're kind of like we haven't seen one of those coming by these parts, especially in Denver. Like this is really exciting, because it used to be, well, I don't know, and people want to debate. Now they're just like, you're a curiosity. Like, a lot of the parents that I have in my tennis program, they're just kind of like, we're not used to this. Mm-hmm. And so they come and they'll talk to you about things that they don't. People, I don't care what your background, what your religion is, and your family origins. You want to be loved and respected. And Christianity has taught us how to love one another like Christ has loved us. We have the greatest gift to give to this world. And I would just say the way to bridge it is to love on those people. Be good to them, kind to them, serve them. And you know what? They don't care about your perspective. They are so needing genuine, sincere love. They don't want to be a project. That's what they're worried about. Everybody else treats them like some type of, market dynamic. You scratch my back, I scratch yours. Christianity is, let me just love you. And if you have sincere love for them, they're going to love you. They're going to just think the world of you.
Well, it's that notion of being authentic. You talked
Yes.
about this in the 4 o'clock session. It is a buzzword. It's a really popular term to be using, but that's what we want. We can see through fake.
Yes.
Because we've all been watching fake in every aspect of our lives for so long that to have someone who's truly authentic, you may be met with resistance at first, because there's the skepticism of, I'm not really sure if I buy what you're selling, even though you're not selling something. But that's what people are afraid of. But if you are authentic, you're going to be able to break through that. So to that idea of authenticity, I know somebody came to you earlier and was wanting either some clarification or whatnot on the idea that you discussed in one of your sessions this morning, that you phrased it as showing your own weakness. It was in your AIM, your AIM method.
Yeah.
You're talking about being able to talk about your own weakness or whatnot. And I think this person asked for some clarity, or brought the word vulnerability. Tell me a little bit about how that conversation went.
There's the law of reciprocity. And so, like, if I was to give Corey a water bottle, he would feel like he needs to give me a water bottle. Like, if you do something nice for somebody feels like they need to do something nice to you. And so one of the rules is, if you start with a weakness, like, you're not really trying to put yourself down, you're not trying to make yourself look bad, but it's just being vulnerable. It shows that you have weaknesses, because a lot of people have the filter that Christians are judgmental. And so if you start with a weakness, you kind of diffuse that, but it also allows them to feel kind of a natural need to be vulnerable back. So if I share something of vulnerability to you, you kind of like, well, this may be a safe place. And they'll share something that's vulnerable. And now all of a sudden you kind of taken that relationship or that conversation to a deeper level. And it's kind of fascinating if you do that. And when you do it, people are going to kind of respond by, oh. Now, you can also tell if they don't want to go there. They're just going to go back to fakes or feelings. But if they show some vulnerability in return, you are now influencing one another. Mm-hmm. And one of the ways to influence is to be influenced. And you listen to their story and you ask questions about their story. You ask them, how did you feel about that? Or you do a perception check sometimes. I sense that you are somebody who deeply cares about that. Yeah, I do. Like, we all like to be understood. And so it's just a way of trying to create a way to be understanding for another. And it feels great to understand others. If you as the Christian show a weakness and the person's like, yeah, I can relate to that, you got connection.
I just lost my thought. I hate it when that happens.
I can relate.
Yes, I'm sure you probably can. Uh, oh, and the idea of being vulnerable is not that you're giving up all your deepest, darkest secrets. I think sometimes
don't go there.
No, you don't.
No.
It's not going there. And sometimes when we preachers start talking about being vulnerable, maybe I wonder if sometimes people who hear us have that conversation that their mind jumps to all the big dark holes in my life, and that's not what we mean by being vulnerable.
It means this. My wife doesn't like me yelling at the refs because I blurt things out. I shared a vulnerability, but you're all cool with it. But if you go too deep in a vulnerability, like if you say something like, it's like, whoa, like, okay. Now you actually driven them away. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of being vulnerable to a certain extent, but nobody wants to hear your deepest, darkest secrets, until you pay people to do that.
Yeah, so it's the idea of saying, I actually do, that is a hard time, or that's where I goof up in that area sometimes. So, when we're talking about the idea of being vulnerable, part of being authentic is not trying to put up that fake facade that you've got it all put together and you never struggle through anything.
And you can be funny with it. You can be funny. I think I shared with you guys, I said, yeah, I got married and my wife's worst year of her life was the first year of our marriage.
And she says that, right?
Yes. Now she tries to say it was everything, not just me.
But you're not convinced?
I'm not sure.
Well, and he, to his credit, he said every year has gotten better since.
Well,
We've been going uphill.
That's the key. I create low expectations. And then I had an elder one time. They had me come and speak, and he was driving me back to the airport. And he goes, Matthew, we had you, and we didn't really expect that much. And you could say...
Are you still performing at that level?
Some days.
Some days.
But I think it's kind of even if you have something, it's you know what? Have you guys, can you relate to this? You watched a sports team, and it's your sports team, and it ruins your day because your team lost. And you can share that with another guy, and be like, yeah, I was mad all day. Why was I mad? I still have a job. It's not like I know anybody on the team. Why do I care that much? And now the person's like, hey, you get annoyed about stuff, but it's a good way of just building that relationship. They'll be like, oh, yeah, I was mad about, but now they just shared an emotion.
And so hopefully you were able to perceive that and use that to get into the door of spiritual conversation. Yeah. Let me throw a few of these here at you that kind of shift gears slightly and kind of see if you have some thoughts on it. Somebody wrote in the question, I feel like the question I never know how to answer is this. When I say I'm going to church or to Bible study, people will ask, oh, what is your religion or denomination? I feel like if I answer Christian, they will assume Catholic, Baptist, etc., because they don't know about true Christianity. And if I say non-denominational, well, I feel like people have certain opinions about that as well. Can you give thoughts on how might be the best way to answer them?
That's a great question. And we have been dancing around this question for so many years. You know what I say? I go to a Church of Christ. It's the truth. If they were to show up, that's what they would show up for. And I just say, Church of Christ. And they say, what is that? And I say, well, we're kind of non-denominational. Every church kind of makes its own decision, and that's kind of who we are, and we just try to go by the Bible. Oh, okay. I think we've been, all the terms have got so convoluted. And I remember, doing this. I became a brand new Christian. I get up to Nova Scotia. My aunt asked me, what church I go to. And I was like, I go to a non-denominational. And she's like, what's that? And I was like, I don't know. So They're just asking. So just say, I go to the Church of Christ. What's that? They're going to, if they want to ask, and if they're like, oh, I'd never go there, I said, I really like it. You do? Yeah, people are great. Like, dancing around something is probably not going to get you that far. And then, what if they show up and they're like, oh, that's a Church of Christ. You didn't tell me. Well, now you're really stuck. Like, what? So now what are you going to do?
So
I saw the name Church of Christ on the building, and you didn't tell me. You tricked me.
You tricked me into coming.
Yes,
no, I didn't trick you.
Just come out with it.
Well, as you're describing this idea in your last session about being postmodern versus modern, and those are terms we hear an awful lot. Postmodernity, modernism, all those kinds of things, and maybe we don't always fully understand what we're talking about. But one of the things I have noticed in the last, I'll say the last maybe 10 years, with my ministry and interactions with people, is there are a lot of things that I grew up hearing about, these kinds of questions. The distinction between individual Christian groups, the denominational groups and whatnot. And within our circle, that's a big conversation for us. And there was a point in time, and folks, I say this having grown up in the Southeast, okay? There's 500 churches in any given town. And so growing up in that culture, it was a big deal to say, oh, well, where do you go? And if you said, I go to the Church of Christ, or if I'm Baptist, or whatever the case is, even if you said Christian, they're going to want to know, well, what kind? And it said an awful lot about you immediately, just like that. But I think what you're tapping into, Matthew, is realizing that the term you hear an awful lot today is that we are in a post-Christian society. We have more and more and more people who they know Christianity exists, but they don't know all the various nuanced terminology. And so for them, there's a really good chance that if somebody's asking you that question, they may not, like you're saying, they don't really know anyway. They just know that there's a bunch of different names out there. And that can actually be a great opportunity to be able to have one of those spiritual conversations or get your foot in the door
I
on
told
that
one of
kind of
my
conversation.
tennis kids one day, he was talking smack to me about something, and I said, man, Austin, I said, you better not do me like Judas. And he goes, who? I said, Judas. And he goes, who's that? And then this other kid goes, I won't forsake you, coach. and I told the kid, and I said, go home and look up who Judas is. And this kid, this is where he was at. He comes the next day, coach, I'm loyal. He was like, I'm not going to turn my back on you. I'm not going to sell you out, coach.
I won't desert you, coach.
And he's a great kid. But that's how far our kids are away from Christianity.
Yeah.
We're fighting fights. They're not fighting.
And a lot of times that is the case. So similar, somebody asked this question since we're talking about how to describe. Is this us? Did I turn this on inadvertently? Nope. Somebody asked the question, how would you approach talking to Mormon missionaries or any other missionaries that come to you instead of you being the one that initiated the conversation?
I've had numerous Mormon missionaries come to my house. I think I got blacklisted. Because, Mormons are good people. I have some friends that are Mormons, and I have some kids that are Mormons, and they're really good people. A lot of them generally are good people, and I really appreciate them. I am so far away from their doctrine that it's not funny. I think their process, I will ask questions, I will show verses, and see if there's any receptivity. I also have found that once there is, they're getting pulled away. So the people are going to, so I kind of just have the conversation, plant some seeds, and I think it's a process. Mm-hmm. So I think sometimes we think that in evangelism it's all up to us, where I have to plant a seed, I have to water a seed, I have to, see it grow and nurture it. But I would just, do what you can do and be fine with that. Like, we're not going to handle all problems and get everybody, but, there's the principle. Apollos planted, Paul watered, I'm not sure who watered and planted, but the key is plant a seed, and you never know where it's going to go. So that's about what I would say about that.
I think one of the misnomers that some of us have had, that some people have had, because I know before that you've got to wrap up an entire that you're trying.
They were there, and they brought some of their food, which was really good. Nobody else in the family ate it, but I was just eating it up. And so we had to use Google Translate. And so we had this great Thanksgiving, and I remember sitting on the floor. We had prayer in the name of Jesus. But we tried to respect their culture by, at dessert, we sat on the floor and ate it. Now, it was fascinating because usually you would serve the women at one of our meals in America, but you don't do that. And so I looked up at some of the cultural differences, and I tried to the best of my ability, respect any culture that they had to show, and it wasn't like a huge deal, but I remember one of the women looking at me, and she was telling us, she's like, this is my bad impression of it in English. But she was saying, that man's on the floor because he's trying to show honor to me. I think it's just a matter of trying to language and trying to find that culture and just say, I'm willing to honor your culture to the best of my. But I can say, I got no. All everything that they fed me. So I think it's an honor to them And it's not like, here's my Western culture with my Christianity. It's, here's my Christianity, honor.
Ways that he could.
That family's going to church now. Like, they're coming to church now, and they actually kind of like adopted or whatever. I don't know. They were like excited. It was so much fun. See church, and we always hide our sins probably much more than reveal them. But I think people are looking at us, and when they see forgiveness from one another, I think they could start to say they can forgive themselves. I do remember hearing this preacher when he preached here in Denver for I think 40 some years. He was retiring, and I asked him this question during his last time, and I said, over all these 40 years, what do you think was the most powerful thing about the gospel that you have seen in your years? And he told me this story. He said there was this man that he was carrying his groceries across the church parking lot. And so he asked him, he goes, hey, can I help you carry your groceries? And the man's like, yeah, sure. So he actually helped him carry them. And he lived kind of close to the church building in an apartment. And I think his name was Frank. And so Frank... that was that. But then he started seeing them. He'd come into the church building. He'd see Frank kind of out there. And he got to kind of know him, built a relationship with him. And then Frank started coming into the church building, coming to worship. And so then the preacher asked him, he goes, would you like to have a study? And he had a study with him. But as they continued to study, Frank looked at him when he got kind of to the point of needing to be baptized. He says, I can't be baptized. And the preacher said, why can't you be baptized? He goes, you don't know what I have done. He goes, what have you done? He goes, I'm a Korean War veteran, and I killed women and children. There's no way God can forgive me. He continued to come to church. He'd study every now and then, but mostly just come to church. And Robert every now and then would bring it up. Frank, have you thought about being baptized? Have you thought about putting the Lord Jesus Christ on? You know there's forgiveness. And every time Frank would look at him, he goes, you just don't get it. I killed women and children. The things I did in war, I can never be forgiven. He said this went on for years. Until one night, I think it was about 11 o'clock at night, he said, guy called him up. He says, Robert, can you meet me at the church building? I want to be baptized. He said he went into the baptistry, baptized him, came up out of this water, and he was just sobbing with joy. And he said he knew him for 20 more years. And that man never mentioned what he did in the war. He felt forgiveness. I think people can experience forgiveness when we model forgiveness for one another. The world's looking at us. And if we don't show forgiveness, if we see bitterness or harshness with one another in the church, somebody's sitting there thinking, well, I wonder if I can be forgiven. They're going to say, nah. But when they see Christians show that type of forgiving love, they'll experience it. And when they experience it, it's a beautiful thing to behold.
Yes, it is.
Our God is greater, our God is stronger. God, you are higher than any other.